Jordan Harrington's heart pounded as the flight attendant loomed over him, his voice sharp with authority. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist that you either switch seats or step off the aircraft." Silence swallowed the cabin. Dozens of passengers stared. Some looked away, pretending not to see. Others murmured in hushed whispers. Jordan gripped the armrest. His seat. The one he paid for. The one he chose weeks ago to ensure a comfortable flight. He wasn't moving. The woman standing beside the flight attendant, Harriet Bloom, tightened her grip on her expensive handbag, her lips curling in disgust. She had made it very clear that she did not want to sit next to him. And now, because of her complaints, Jordan, a paying passenger, was being threatened with removal. "I've done nothing wrong," Jordan said, his voice steady but his stomach twisting with unease. Harriet scoffed, folding her arms. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I simply requested a switch. It's a common courtesy." Jordan wanted to laugh. Courtesy? She hadn't even asked him herself. She had gone straight to the flight attendant, whispering in his ear, and now, here they were. Beside him, Addison Green, his best friend and travel companion, gritted her teeth. She had been silent up until now, watching in disbelief. But as the flight attendant moved closer, clearly prepared to escalate things further, she made a decision. With a slow, deliberate motion, Addison pulled out her phone. One call. That was all it would take. Her fingers moved swiftly over the screen, dialing a number Jordan couldn't see. But he knew exactly who she was calling. The flight attendant froze, eyes flicking between Addison and Jordan. Harriet's face darkened. "What are you doing?" Addison didn't answer. She simply pressed the phone to her ear, her expression hard as stone. Then, she spoke. "This is Addison Green. I need to report an airline discrimination incident. Immediately." Harriet's eyes widened in shock. The flight attendant's jaw tightened. A beat of silence. Then another. Jordan's breath caught in his throat as he saw the first ripple of panic flash across the flight attendant's face. Something was about to change. And it was about to change fast. Hours earlier, everything had been normal. Jordan and Addison had arrived at the Philadelphia airport with time to spare. Jordan was traveling to Seattle to celebrate his sister's acceptance into an elite art residency. Addison, newly single after breaking off an engagement, was tagging along, desperate for a change of scenery. As they made their way through security, Addison nudged Jordan. "You nervous about flying?" Jordan chuckled. "No, I don't know. Something feels off today. Probably just stress." Addison shrugged. "You've had a lot on your mind lately." She wasn't wrong. Since losing his job at a design agency, Jordan had been stuck in limbo. Seattle was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to clear his head and figure out his next steps. As they boarded the plane, Jordan felt a little better. His seat, 16A, was exactly where he wanted. By the window, plenty of legroom. Then Harriet Bloom entered the cabin. Draped in an elegant coat, she carried herself with an air of superiority. The moment her eyes landed on Jordan's seat, something changed. She whispered something to the flight attendant, Carter Davis, who nodded and started down the aisle toward Jordan. Jordan felt a prick of unease. Carter stopped beside him, flashing a rehearsed smile. "Sir, we have a small request. This passenger would like to switch seats with you. She says hers is near the restroom and prefers more space." Jordan blinked. "I'd rather keep my seat." Carter's smile faltered. Harriet, standing just behind him, narrowed her eyes. "It's just a simple request," she said, her voice clipped. Jordan's grip on the armrest tightened. "I paid for this seat. I chose it for a reason." Harriet scoffed. "Well, I paid for mine too. But I expected better accommodations." Something in her tone made Jordan's stomach twist. It wasn't just about the seat. Addison, silent up until now, looked between Jordan and Harriet, sensing the tension rising. She shifted slightly in her seat, her fingers tapping on the armrest. Carter exhaled. "Sir, would you please come with me? We can find you another seat." "Let's not make this difficult." Jordan's blood ran cold. Difficult? The words tasted bitter in his mouth. "I'm just sitting in my assigned seat. How is that difficult?" Harriet huffed, turning toward Carter. "Are you going to do something or not?" Carter hesitated. Then, In a firm voice, he said the words that made Jordan's breath hitch in his throat. "If you don't comply, we'll have to ask you to step off the plane." A ripple of whispers spread through the rows. Passengers turned their heads, eyes darting between Jordan, Harriet, and Carter. Addison sat up straight, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached for her phone. Harriet noticed. "What do you think you're doing?" Addison's fingers moved over the screen, and then she made the call. Everything changed in an instant. Jordan could see it in Carter's eyes. The sudden flicker of uncertainty. The way he straightened his back, as if realizing, for the first time, that this situation was no longer in his control. Harriet's lips parted, her breath coming quicker now. Addison's voice was steady. "I need to report an incident of racial discrimination on this flight." Carter's expression twisted. "That's not what this is." Addison didn't blink. "I wasn't talking to you," she said coldly. Then she turned her gaze to Jordan. "Stay put," she whispered. "This is about to get interesting." For a moment, everything was frozen. The air inside the cabin felt thick, charged with tension. Harriet's mouth opened and closed as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Carter's face paled, and he looked around, as if searching for backup. Passengers whispered. Some turned their heads away, pretending not to see. Others watched in stunned silence, eyes darting between Jordan, Addison, and the crew. Addison, still holding the phone to her ear, didn't flinch. "Yes," she continued, her voice sharp and unwavering. "My name is Addison Green, and I'm on flight 3287 from Philadelphia to Seattle. A black passenger is being threatened with removal from the plane simply because he refused to give up his paid seat to a white woman who wants it." Harriet gasped as if she had been personally insulted. "That's not what happened," she hissed, her face turning red. Carter took a step forward, his voice a forced calm. "Ma'am, I don't think this is necessary." Addison ignored him. She turned slightly, just enough to glance down the aisle where another flight attendant, Lisa Montgomery, was standing near the front of the plane, watching. Lisa had been quiet during the exchange, but now, her posture was rigid, her brows furrowed. Jordan saw something flicker in Lisa's eyes. Unease. As if she knew, deep down, that this was about to spiral into something much, much bigger. "Yes," Addison continued, her voice loud enough for half the plane to hear. "I'm telling you exactly what's happening. And I'm recording it too. I need someone from corporate to address this before a passenger gets unfairly removed." Carter's jaw clenched. "This isn't necessary," he said, his voice dangerously low. But it was too late. The damage was already done. A woman sitting 3 rows back, an older black woman in a navy blue sweater, suddenly leaned forward and spoke up. "I saw everything," she said firmly, making sure her voice carried. "That young man didn't do anything wrong. He was sitting in his seat, minding his business. That woman," she pointed at Harriet, "is the one making a fuss." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. More heads turned. More whispers followed. Carter's face twisted. Harriet's cheeks burned with humiliation. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted." But her voice faltered, because now, people were listening. The older woman wasn't done. "Son," she said, turning to Jordan, her expression warm but serious, "you stay right where you are. Don't let them bully you." Jordan swallowed hard. His pulse pounded in his ears. For a brief second, he wondered if this was really happening. If he was truly about to be thrown off a flight because a woman like Harriet Bloom couldn't stand sitting near him. And then, just as that thought settled in his mind, a voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The murmurs died instantly. Captain Barnes' voice was smooth and steady, but there was something in his tone that made it clear he was aware of the situation unfolding in his cabin. "We understand there has been a disagreement regarding seating arrangements. Please remain in your seats while we address the matter." Carter visibly tensed. Harriet looked like she wanted to disappear. Addison smirked. "Good," she murmured. "Now we're getting somewhere." A long, tense silence followed. Lisa, the other flight attendant, took a deep breath and finally stepped forward. Her voice was much calmer than Carter's, but there was a firmness to it that hadn't been there before. We need to clarify something, Lisa said, looking at Carter before turning to Jordan. Sir, did you request this seat specifically?
Yes.
Jordan's voice was steady. I paid for this seat. Lisa nodded and turned to Harriet. Ma'am, is there a reason you can't sit in your assigned seat? Harriet sputtered, clearly thrown off by the question. I have back problems. I need more space. Lisa didn't blink. Did you request special accommodations when you booked your ticket? Harriet hesitated. Jordan saw it, the small flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Lisa didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she turned back to Carter. We can't force a passenger to move just because another one wants their seat. Carter's nostrils flared. Harriet let out a sharp breath. Oh, so that's it, she scoffed. You're siding with him? Lisa ignored her and turned to Jordan. Sir, you don't have to move if you don't want to. Jordan nodded, but before he could speak, Harriet let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable, she muttered. You're all acting like I'm the bad guy, like I did something wrong just because I asked for a simple favor. And now I'm the villain? Silence. Then Addison chuckled. A slow, amused chuckle. Oh, Harriet, Addison said, shaking her head. The fact that you don't see what's wrong with this situation is exactly why you're in it. Harriet's mouth opened to snap back, but before she could, the front of the plane suddenly burst into motion. Lisa's radio crackled, and she reached for it just as the cabin doors swung open. Two uniformed airline supervisors stepped inside, and behind them, a security officer. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. Harriet's eyes widened in horror. And Carter paled. Lisa exhaled, stepping back as the lead supervisor, a tall woman in a gray suit, stepped into the aisle. She scanned the faces before her gaze settled on Carter and Harriet. Are you Carter Davis? She asked sharply. Carter hesitated, then nodded. The woman turned to Harriet. And you're Harriet Bloom? Harriet swallowed hard.
Why, yes.
The woman's lips pressed into a firm line. We need to have a conversation, she said. Then, with a voice as steady as steel, step off the aircraft immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the plane. Carter stiffened. Wait, what? Harriet reeled back. Me? Why? I didn't do anything. The woman didn't waver. We have received a direct report from corporate about your conduct on this flight. We are handling this situation as per airline policy. Step off the aircraft. Harriet turned to Carter, panic flashing in her eyes. You're not going to let them do this, are you? Carter hesitated. Then, one of the supervisors stepped forward and handed him a folded piece of paper. You're being placed on immediate suspension pending investigation, the supervisor said coldly. Carter's face drained of all color. Harriet's breathing hitched. No, she whispered. This can't be happening. But it was happening. Passengers watched in stunned silence as Carter and Harriet were escorted toward the front of the plane. As Harriet passed Jordan, her face twisted with anger and disbelief. This isn't over, she spat. Jordan didn't respond. He simply watched as Harriet and Carter were led off the plane. Then, for the first time since the ordeal began, he took a deep, steady breath and sat back in his seat. The cabin remained eerily quiet as the plane door closed behind Harriet and Carter. The passengers, frozen in their seats just moments ago, began shifting uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others openly looked at Jordan, their expressions ranging from curiosity to quiet approval. Lisa, the only remaining flight attendant on duty, exhaled sharply and stepped forward, smoothing her uniform. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carefully composed, thank you for your patience. We will be continuing with the flight as planned. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker once again. We apologize for the delay. We should be cleared for takeoff momentarily. Please remain in your seats. Jordan let out a slow breath, barely believing what had just happened. A moment ago, he was being threatened with removal from the plane. Now, Harriet and Carter were the ones escorted off. Addison, still gripping her phone, leaned over with a smirk. Well, she whispered, I'd say that went better than expected. Jordan shot her a look. Better? I almost got kicked off a plane. But you didn't. Addison wiggled her phone.
Because I don't play.
Jordan shook his head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Addison had always been fierce, but this was something else. He wasn't sure if he would have stood his ground the way he did without her backing him up. The older black woman from 3 rows back leaned forward again. "Good for you, son," she said, nodding approvingly. "I've seen too many people get bullied like that. You held your own." Jordan managed a small smile. "Thank you." A few other passengers were murmuring to each other, some casting glances at him. He could tell some of them were supportive, but others, "Why didn't he just move?" someone muttered under their breath. Jordan heard it. He knew that attitude. The people who saw injustice but didn't want to rock the boat. The ones who thought going along with it was the easier choice. Lisa walked back down the aisle and stopped beside Jordan's row. "Sir," she said softly, "I just want to say I'm sorry about all that. That's not how we're supposed to handle things." Jordan studied her face. He could see genuine regret there. "It wasn't your fault," he admitted. "You tried to help." Lisa nodded, her shoulders easing slightly. "If you need anything during the flight, just let me know." Jordan appreciated the gesture, even though his mind was still racing. As Lisa walked away, Addison nudged him. "So," she murmured, "you realize this isn't over, right?" Jordan frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're gone. We won." Addison let out a dry chuckle. "Jordan, Harriet's the type of woman who doesn't just take an L and move on. She's going to fight this." Jordan thought about the way Harriet's eyes had burned into his before she left. The venom in her voice when she hissed, "This isn't over." A knot formed in his stomach. Addison was right. This wasn't over. The flight to Seattle was strangely quiet after that. With Carter gone, Lisa was the only flight attendant left, and she did her best to keep things running smoothly. She moved through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks with a polite, if slightly tense, smile. Jordan and Addison sat back, trying to relax. The tension in Jordan's shoulders didn't ease, though. He kept replaying the moment Harriet turned to him with pure hatred in her eyes. He didn't doubt for a second that she was already planning her next move. Addison had been right from the start. This wasn't just about a seat. As the plane cruised over the country, Jordan tried to shake the lingering anxiety. He focused on the view outside the window, the endless stretch of clouds beneath them. Seattle. He needed to focus on Seattle. He had come here for a reason, to support his sister, Olivia. She had worked so hard to get into her art residency, and Jordan wasn't about to let Harriet Bloom ruin this trip. He was going to enjoy his time in Seattle. He was going to forget about all of this. But then, just as he was starting to believe it, Lisa stopped by their row again, her face unusually pale. "Sir," she said quietly, "I just wanted to give you a heads up." Jordan sat up straighter. "About what?" Lisa hesitated, glancing down the aisle before leaning in. "We just got a message from corporate," she said, keeping her voice low. Harriet Bloom filed a complaint. Jordan's stomach dropped. Addison cursed under her breath. "What kind of complaint?" Jordan asked, though he already had a bad feeling about it. Lisa sighed. "She's claiming you harassed her." Jordan's hands clenched into fists. "That's ridiculous." "I know," Lisa said quickly. "And Captain Barnes already gave his statement, saying you did nothing wrong. But corporate is treating this seriously. Harriet is an elite status flyer. She has connections." Jordan exhaled through his nose, trying to keep his temper in check. Of course Harriet had connections. "Are they trying to turn this around on me?" he asked. Lisa looked uncomfortable. "I don't know yet, but I wanted you to be aware." Addison shook her head, muttering under her breath, "I knew it. I knew she wasn't gonna let this go." Jordan swallowed down his frustration and nodded at Lisa. "Thanks for telling me." Lisa hesitated. "And there's one more thing." Jordan braced himself. "What now?" Lisa glanced toward the cockpit. "Harriet isn't the only one who filed a complaint." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "Who else?" Lisa bit her lip. "Carter." Jordan's blood turned to ice. Carter, the flight attendant who had threatened to kick him off the plane, had also filed a complaint against him. Addison's expression darkened. "You've got to be kidding me." Lisa shook her head. "I wish I was." Jordan felt the plane dip slightly as the captain prepared for descent. His ears popped, but it wasn't from the altitude. He had thought this was over. But Harriet and Carter weren't just walking away quietly. They were fighting back. And now, Jordan was at the center of something much bigger than he ever imagined. Jordan's stomach twisted as Lisa's words settled in. Not only had Harriet filed a complaint against him, but Carter had too. The very flight attendant who had threatened to remove him. The very man who had stood beside Harriet, backing her entitlement. He was now trying to flip the script. Jordan exhaled sharply, gripping the armrest. "What exactly is Carter claiming?" he asked, his voice tight. Lisa hesitated. "I don't have all the details, but from what I overheard, he's saying that you were the aggressor. That you made a scene and were uncooperative with the crew's instructions." Addison scoffed, crossing her arms. "Are you kidding me? We literally have witnesses." The captain himself saw what happened. Lisa nodded quickly. "I know. And trust me, Captain Barnes isn't going to let them twist the story. But corporate has to investigate when a senior flight attendant files a report." Jordan pinched the bridge of his nose. "So what does that mean for me?" Lisa bit her lip. "It means you're likely going to hear from the airline. Possibly soon. And depending on how much noise Harriet and Carter make, they could try to escalate it." Jordan's heart pounded. "Escalate it how?" Addison leaned forward. "Do you think they'd actually try to ban him from flying?" Lisa sighed. "I don't know. But if Harriet pulls strings, and Carter plays the experienced employee card, they might try to make Jordan the scapegoat." Jordan felt his pulse quicken. He could barely believe what he was hearing. He had been sitting in his seat, minding his business. He had done nothing wrong. And yet, here he was, facing possible consequences for simply existing in a space Harriet didn't want him in. Addison's face darkened. "We need to get ahead of this." Jordan turned to her. "How?" She tapped her phone screen. "We need witnesses to speak up. We're not going to just sit back and let them control the story." Lisa nodded in agreement. "I can't speak officially as an employee, but if corporate tries to twist this, I will make sure my statement is on record." Jordan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had never been the type to seek out conflict. He hated drama. But this wasn't just drama. This was bigger than him now. And Harriet Bloom wasn't done yet. By the time the plane landed in Seattle, Jordan's nerves were still wound tight. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers began shifting, stretching, and grabbing their bags from the overhead bins. But Jordan barely moved. His thoughts were racing. How far would Harriet go? How much power did she have? Would the airline actually believe her over him? He was so lost in thought that he barely noticed Addison standing up until she nudged his shoulder. "Come on, we need to get off," she murmured. Jordan nodded numbly, reaching for his carry-on. As they stepped into the aisle, a few passengers gave him small nods of encouragement. The older black woman from earlier caught his eye. "Stay strong, baby," she said warmly. He managed a grateful smile. "Thank you." As they stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, Jordan inhaled the cool Seattle air. He wanted to believe that this was over, that he could finally just move on. But then, just as they reached the gate, Addison's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Her entire expression changed. Jordan tensed. "What is it?" Addison's lips parted in disbelief. "Oh my God." She turned the phone around, and Jordan's heart stopped, because on the screen was a news headline. Elite airline passenger claims she was harassed by aggressive black man on flight. Jordan's blood turned ice cold. The article had already been published. Harriet had wasted no time. And now, the whole world was about to hear her twisted version of the story. Jordan's breath caught in his throat as he stared at Addison's phone screen. There it was. A full-blown news article. Harriet had gone straight to the media, twisting the story to paint herself as the victim. He scanned the article in disbelief. The wording was careful, designed to make Harriet seem sympathetic while making him look like an unpredictable, aggressive black man. A well-respected traveler, Harriet Bloom, reported feeling unsafe on a flight from Philadelphia to Seattle when a male passenger refused to comply with a reasonable seating request. Sources close to Bloom say she was shaken by the confrontation and has since filed an official complaint with the airline, citing harassment and intimidation. Airline officials have yet to release a statement. Jordan's hands clenched into fists. "Are you kidding me?" he breathed. Addison's face was twisted with fury. She must have started this the moment she got off the plane. Jordan's pulse pounded in his ears. The words on the screen blurred together as a rush of emotions crashed over him. Rage, disbelief, fear. This was bigger than an airline dispute now. This was a narrative, and Harriet was shaping it in her favor. Addison scrolled down. Look at these comments. Jordan didn't want to, but his eyes flicked to the section anyway. Why do people always have to make everything about race? Maybe he was being aggressive. I've flown for years, and let me tell you, if a flight attendant asks you to move, you move. Entitled much? Of course he played the victim card. Classic. Jordan felt his stomach churn. Complete strangers were already taking Harriet's side. They didn't know him. They hadn't seen what really happened. But it didn't matter. All Harriet had to do was plant the idea that she was a frail, defenseless woman, and that he was the threat. Addison exhaled sharply and locked her phone. Nope, we are not letting her control this. Jordan shook his head, trying to push past the anger burning in his chest. How do we even fight this? She's already ahead of us. Addison's eyes darkened. Then we catch up. They barely spoke as they made their way to baggage claim. Jordan's thoughts were spinning too fast. Every time he thought this nightmare was over, it just kept getting worse. As they reached the carousel, a familiar voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Jordan. He turned just in time to see his sister, Olivia, rushing toward him. She wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, her long braids swaying as she pulled back to look at him. I'm so glad you're here. But her smile faded as she studied his face. What's wrong? Jordan hesitated. He didn't want to dump all of this on her right away. This trip was supposed to be about her. But Addison didn't hesitate. Oh, just the fact that your brother got racially profiled on a plane, threatened with removal, and is now being smeared all over the internet? Olivia's eyes widened. Wait, what? Jordan sighed. It's complicated. Olivia folded her arms. Then start uncomplicating it. What happened? As they grabbed their bags and stepped outside to wait for their rideshare, Jordan recounted everything. The seat dispute, Harriet's entitled behavior, Carter's threats, the phone call that changed everything, and finally, the news article. By the time he finished, Olivia's hands were shaking. Oh, hell no, she muttered. Hell
No.
Addison nodded. Exactly. Olivia's jaw tightened. You know this is only going to get worse, right? Jordan groaned. Can we not focus on that part? No, I mean it, Olivia insisted. You need to get ahead of this. Before Harriet's story spreads even further, Jordan exhaled. And how do I do that? It's not like I have a media team. Olivia's eyes gleamed. You don't need one. You have the truth. Jordan frowned. I don't. Then he saw it. The determined look in Olivia's eyes. The same look she got whenever she was about to change the game. You need to go public, she said firmly. Jordan stared at her. What? You need to tell your side of the story, Olivia continued. If you don't, Harriet's version is all people will see. Jordan hesitated. I don't know. I don't really like attention like that. Addison gave him a pointed look. Jordan, you already have attention, whether you like it or not. The only question is, are you going to control it, or are you going to let Harriet? Jordan swallowed hard. His whole life, he had avoided situations like this. He wasn't a confrontational person. He didn't go looking for fights. But now, he was in one. And if he stayed silent, Harriet would win. Jordan exhaled. Okay. Olivia grinned. Good. Now let's go viral. Jordan sat stiffly on Olivia's couch, his hands clasped together, as Addison set up her phone on a small tripod. The apartment smelled of fresh coffee and paint, the walls lined with Olivia's latest watercolor pieces. Normally, this was a place of peace. Tonight, it was a war room. Are we sure about this? Jordan muttered, staring at the phone like it was a ticking bomb. Addison rolled her eyes. Yes, we're sure. She adjusted the camera angle. You want to let Harriet control the story? Or do you want to set the record straight? Jordan hesitated. He wanted to fight back. He wanted the world to know what really happened. But once he put his story out there was no turning back. Olivia sat across from him, arms crossed. Harriet didn't waste time before running to the media, and she's got people believing her. She picked up her phone and scrolled. Look at this. Some news sites are already picking it up. If you don't speak up, they'll run with her version. Jordan exhaled, rubbing his temples. What do I even say? Addison handed him her phone. I wrote a draft. Jordan skimmed the words on the screen. It was short but powerful. My name is Jordan Harrington. I was on flight 3287 from Philadelphia to Seattle, sitting in a seat I paid for. A white woman, Harriet Bloom, demanded I move because she wanted my seat. When I refused, a flight attendant threatened to remove me from the plane. Now, that same woman is falsely claiming I harassed her. This is my truth. It was blunt, to the point. No fluff. Jordan swallowed hard. People are going to come after me for this. People are already coming after you, Olivia countered. The question is, are you going to let them define you, or are you going to stand up for yourself? Jordan clenched his jaw. She was right. He took a deep breath. Let's do it. The video was live within minutes. Jordan watched as the numbers climbed. 10 views. 1,000. Then 10,000. It was spreading. Fast. The comments started flooding in. Some were supportive. This is exactly why we need to speak up. I believe you, Jordan. The fact that he had to defend himself for sitting in his assigned seat is crazy, but others. So he refused to move and now he's playing the victim? Typical. Always making everything about race. Jordan's stomach twisted. He knew the backlash was coming, but seeing it in real time made his skin crawl. Addison was glued to her phone. It's being retweeted everywhere. Then, her eyes widened. Oh. Jordan tensed. What? She turned her phone around. A blue checkmark. A famous civil rights activist had reposted Jordan's video with the caption, "This is why we still fight. The world needs to see this." Jordan's heart stopped. It wasn't just viral anymore. It was national. The next morning, Jordan woke up to chaos. His phone was vibrating nonstop. Texts, missed calls, emails. He barely had time to blink before Olivia burst into his room. "You're on the news." Jordan bolted upright. "What?" She grabbed the remote, turned on the TV, and there it was. His face. His video. A panel of news commentators debating it like it was a political scandal. One of them, a middle-aged man in a stiff suit, shook his head. "Look, I don't know the full story, but this just seems like unnecessary drama. Why didn't he just move?" Another commentator, a black woman, cut in sharply. "Because he shouldn't have to. That's the point." Jordan ran a hand over his face. "Oh my God." Addison rushed in, her phone in hand. "Okay, we have a problem." Jordan groaned. "Another one?" She shoved her phone toward him. Harriet responded. Jordan's stomach dropped. He read the post, his eyes narrowing in anger. "Harriet Bloom, at Real Harriet B. I am shaken by the lies being spread about me. I simply asked for a seat change due to medical reasons, and now I'm being painted as a racist villain. I was the one who felt unsafe. I was the one who was harassed. The internet is attacking an innocent woman over a misunderstanding. This has gone too far." Jordan's blood boiled. She was doubling down, playing the victim. Again. And the worst part? People were believing her. Olivia clenched her fists. "We need to hit back."
Hard.
Jordan shook his head. "No, we don't argue with her. We let the truth speak for itself." Addison's eyebrows shot up. "And how do we do that?" Jordan inhaled deeply. "We get the witnesses to speak." By noon, Addison had tracked down multiple passengers from the flight. The older black woman, Mrs. Carter, agreed to do a live interview. A younger man who had sat 2 rows back tweeted, "I was on that flight." Jordan was calm. The woman was the one making demands. "This is ridiculous." Even Lisa, the flight attendant, sent a private message saying she was willing to back him up if needed. The tides were shifting. Jordan could feel it. But then, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A clipped voice responded. "Mr. Harrington, this is Janice Porter from the airline's corporate office. We need to speak about the incident on your flight." Jordan's chest tightened. He shot a look at Addison and Olivia. Sure." Janice exhaled. "We've completed our preliminary investigation. After reviewing multiple witness statements, including from our own employees, we have made a decision." Jordan held his breath. We are officially terminating Carter Davis from our airline. Silence. Jordan blinked. What? Janice continued. His behavior was unacceptable. He violated multiple policies and escalated a situation unnecessarily. He is no longer employed with us. Jordan's mind reeled. Carter was fired. It was actually happening. Addison clapped her hands together. Oh, that's huge. Janice wasn't done. Additionally, we have reached out to Harriet Bloom to inform her that her complaint has been dismissed due to lack of evidence. Jordan exhaled sharply. So, that's it? She gets to walk away? Janice hesitated. For now. But given the media attention, I wouldn't be surprised if this escalates further. Jordan swallowed. What do you mean? Janice sighed. Miss Bloom is connected. She won't let this go without a fight. Jordan tightened his grip on the phone. He had won this round. But Harriet Bloom wasn't finished. And something told him the worst was yet to come. Jordan's fingers tightened around the phone as Janice Porter's words sank in. Harriet Bloom isn't finished. He had thought this nightmare was finally coming to an end. Carter had been fired. Harriet's complaint had been dismissed. The truth was spreading. But deep down, he knew Harriet Bloom wasn't the type to accept defeat. Jordan exhaled. So what happens now? Janice hesitated. For now, our airline considers the matter closed. But Miss Bloom, she has resources. She's already threatening legal action against us. Addison let out a low whistle. Of course she is. Janice sighed. I just wanted to give you a heads up. You might want to be careful. Jordan frowned. Careful how? She's powerful, Janice said bluntly. She has money. Connections. If she wants to make this difficult for you, she will. A lump formed in Jordan's throat. Harriet had already lied to the media. She had already tried to paint him as the aggressor. If she was willing to go this far, what else was she capable of? Janice's voice softened. I believe you, Mr. Harrington. So does Captain Barnes. And a lot of people at this airline do, too. But Harriet Bloom is the kind of person who doesn't just lose. She fights until she gets what she wants. Jordan clenched his jaw. Then she picked the wrong person to mess with. Janice was silent for a beat, then sighed. Good luck. The call ended. Jordan lowered the phone, his heart still pounding. She's coming for me, he muttered. Addison's face darkened. Let her try. Olivia leaned forward. We need to get ahead of whatever she's planning. Jordan ran a hand over his face. How? I thought going public was the big move. Olivia tapped her phone. We need more than just our voices. We need to hit back with proof. Real proof? Jordan frowned. Like what? Olivia's eyes gleamed. The flight footage. Jordan and Addison both sat up straight. Hold up, Addison said. The plane had cameras? Olivia nodded. Most modern flights have surveillance, especially near the front where Harriet threw her tantrum. If we can get access to that footage. Jordan's stomach flipped. If they had the footage, it would prove everything. No more, he said, she said. No more twisted versions of the truth. Just cold, hard evidence. Jordan's pulse quickened. How do we get it? Olivia exhaled. That's the tricky part. An hour later, Jordan, Addison, and Olivia were huddled around Olivia's laptop, searching for answers. The airline might not release it, Olivia muttered, scrolling through legal policies. They don't want to get involved in lawsuits. Jordan groaned. So we're stuck? Addison wasn't listening. She was tapping furiously on her phone. Then suddenly, her eyes widened. Wait, she whispered. I think I found something. Jordan leaned over. What is it? Addison smirked. An inside source. Jordan's stomach flipped. Who? Addison turned the phone around. It was a message thread. Lisa Montgomery. Jordan blinked. The flight attendant? Addison nodded. I reached out. She says there is footage. Jordan's pulse quickened. And? Addison grinned. And she's willing to help us get it. Later that night, Jordan and Addison met Lisa in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Seattle. Olivia had insisted on coming too, but Jordan told her to stay back. This was already risky enough. Lisa looked tense as she sipped her coffee, glancing around like someone might be watching. You're really sticking your neck out for us, Jordan said, watching her carefully. Lisa sighed. Because it's the right thing to do. She set down her cup. Carter deserved to be fired. I told them from the start that what he did was wrong. But Harriet, she shook her head. She's not going to stop. Jordan leaned forward. Tell me about the footage. Lisa hesitated, then whispered, It exists. I saw it. Jordan's heart pounded.
And
Lisa bit her lip. It shows everything. Addison's eyes gleamed. Meaning? Lisa took a deep breath. It shows Harriet approaching Carter before she even asked for the seat change. It shows her whispering something to him, something I couldn't hear. Then it shows Carter going straight to you, already prepared to remove you. Jordan's stomach churned. So they had planned this before even talking to him? Lisa nodded. It also shows the way Harriet looked at you, the way she sneered, the way she spoke down to you, the way she... Lisa swallowed, looking sick. It's clear what her real problem was. Jordan exhaled sharply. He had felt it. He had known it. But hearing it confirmed by someone else made his skin crawl. Addison leaned forward. Can we get the footage? Lisa hesitated. I have a friend in the airline security team. I can try to get a copy. But if they catch me... Jordan's gut clenched. Lisa, I don't want you to risk your job for this. Lisa's jaw tightened. Jordan, I watched Carter abuse his power. I watched Harriet try to get you removed just because she could. If I don't do something now, what's stopping it from happening again? Jordan was silent. Then Lisa pulled out her phone and stood up. Give me a few hours, she said. If I can get it, I'll let you know. Jordan swallowed. Thank you. Lisa gave a small nod. Then she was gone. Jordan exhaled, rubbing his temples. If she pulls this off, Addison murmured, Harriet is done. Jordan nodded, but his stomach was still uneasy. Because deep down, he had a bad feeling. Harriet Bloom was rich, powerful, connected, and if she even suspected they were coming after her, she'd strike first, and she'd make it hurt. Jordan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Harriet's twisted smirk, the way she had looked at him like he didn't belong, the way she had flipped the narrative, playing the victim while making him the villain. And now, thanks to Lisa, they were close to proving the truth. But that also meant they were walking straight into a storm. Jordan checked his phone for the 100th time, but there was no message from Lisa. No update. No confirmation that she had gotten the footage. He hated the waiting. Addison sat on the floor of Olivia's apartment, scrolling through social media. The internet is still eating this up, she muttered. Some people are finally starting to believe you, but there's still a bunch of them siding with Harriet. Jordan groaned. I don't get how anyone can believe her. Because she's rich and white, Olivia said flatly, flipping through a sketchbook on the couch. People like Harriet don't even have to try that hard to make people believe them. Addison's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and sucked in a sharp breath. Jordan tensed. Lisa? Addison nodded. She got it. Jordan sat up straight. The footage? Addison grinned. Oh yeah. And you are not going to believe what's on it. 30 minutes later, Lisa met them at a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands fidgeting with her coffee cup. Jordan could tell she had been up all night making this happen. She slid her phone across the table. Watch. Jordan hesitated, then pressed play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. It started with Harriet boarding the plane. She didn't look tired. She didn't look like a woman with a medical condition. She looked entitled. Then, Harriet spotted Jordan, and her entire demeanor changed. She turned sharply to Carter, the now-fired flight attendant. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear. Carter nodded and immediately turned down the aisle, heading straight for Jordan. Jordan clenched his jaw. She didn't even ask me first. She just went straight to the flight crew. The footage continued. Carter leaned down, speaking to Jordan. Though there was no audio, it was clear Jordan was responding calmly. Then Harriet approached. Jordan watched as her face twisted into frustration when he refused to move. The next moment, something shocking happened. Harriet turned to Carter and smiled. Not the fake, forced smile she had worn while pretending to be the victim. A real smile, like she had just won. Like she knew exactly how this was going to play out. Then Carter spoke again, his posture changing from neutral to aggressive. Jordan's pulse pounded. That's the moment he threatened to remove me. Then Harriet placed a hand on her chest, gasping in exaggerated offense. She turned to the other passengers, as if hoping to draw attention. Then the footage jumped to the moment Addison pulled out her phone. Jordan could see Harriet panic, see the way her eyes darted around, realizing she had lost control. And then, just as the footage neared the end, Harriet turned to Carter one last time. Her lips moved. Jordan couldn't hear the words, but Lisa did. She rewound the clip, then played it in slow motion. And then, she whispered it aloud. She said, "Get rid of him." The table fell silent. Jordan's breath hitched. Harriet had ordered Carter to remove him. Not because of a medical issue. Not because of discomfort. Because she didn't want him there. It was right there. In black and white. Undeniable proof. Addison exhaled sharply. "She's done." Olivia slammed her hand on the table. "We need to put this everywhere." Lisa hesitated. I don't know if I can publicly release this. If they find out it was me." Jordan swallowed. Lisa had already put herself on the line by getting this. He wasn't about to ruin her career over it. He exhaled. "We'll find another way." Addison nodded. "Leave it to me." That night, Jordan's video had reached 1 million views. It was everywhere. But the real bombshell hadn't dropped yet. Addison had sent the footage to a trusted source, an independent journalist who wasn't afraid to take on powerful people. And when the story broke, the internet exploded. Newly released footage proves airline passenger Harriet Bloom lied about seat dispute. Shocking video exposes racial bias on Flight 3287. Harriet Bloom ordered flight attendant to get rid of black passenger. The comments section flipped overnight. People who had defended Harriet were backtracking. "Wow. Okay. I take back everything I said. This is messed up." So she really just tried to remove a black man for existing?
Yikes.
This woman needs to be sued. Jordan barely had time to process it before his phone rang again. It was Janice Porter from the airline. Her voice was urgent. "Mr. Harrington, you need to prepare yourself. Harriet Bloom is about to retaliate." Jordan's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Janice hesitated. "She's hiring lawyers. Expensive ones. She's planning to sue you for defamation." Jordan's pulse stopped. "She's suing me?" Janice sighed. "She's claiming you destroyed her reputation, that you led a social media attack against her." Jordan could barely breathe. She had lied. She had tried to get him kicked off a plane, and now she was suing him? "This is insane," Jordan muttered. Janice's voice was grim. "Harriet Bloom is rich, powerful, and ruthless. She's not going to let you win this without a fight." Jordan felt his hands shake. He had fought to tell the truth. But Harriet Bloom was about to fight back, and she was bringing everything she had. Jordan stared at his phone, his breath shallow. Harriet Bloom was suing him. Not the airline. Not Carter. Not even the media outlets running the footage. Him. The victim. Addison cursed under her breath, pacing Olivia's living room. "This is insane. She was the one who tried to have you kicked off the plane. She is the one caught on video lying. And now she wants to cry defamation?" Olivia sat on the couch, her arms crossed. "It's not about what's true. It's about what she can do. She's got money. And people like her? They weaponize the legal system." Jordan rubbed his temples. "So what do we do?" Addison turned to Olivia. "Your dad. He's a lawyer. Can he help?" Olivia nodded. "He already texted me when the story blew up. He wants to talk to you." Jordan exhaled. "Okay, call him." 20 minutes later, Jordan was sitting on a Zoom call with Richard Green, Addison's father and a powerhouse civil rights attorney. He was calm, collected, and straight to the point. "Jordan," Richard said, adjusting his glasses, "first things first, you do not panic. This is exactly what people like Harriet Bloom do. They push back hard, hoping to scare you into silence." Jordan swallowed. "So what happens now?" "She's suing for defamation, which means she's claiming you damaged her reputation with false claims," Richard explained. "The problem for her is that the footage proves you were telling the truth." Jordan nodded. "So, she has no case?" Richard smirked. "Oh, she has a case. But it's weak. And she knows it. She's not trying to win in court. She's trying to bury you in legal fees until you settle or back down." Jordan's stomach churned. I can't afford to fight this. Richard's eyes darkened. She's banking on that. Jordan sat back, his pulse racing. If Harriet was doing this just to drain him, she could win without ever proving anything. Olivia suddenly leaned forward. Dad, what if we flip this on her? Richard raised an eyebrow. Go on. Olivia pulled up an article on her phone. Harriet lied. She tried to remove Jordan just because she didn't like sitting next to him. And when that didn't work, she weaponized the system against him. Isn't that illegal? Richard exhaled. It can be, depending on how we frame it. Addison sat up straight. What if we sue her? Jordan blinked. Wait, what? Olivia grinned. Think about it. She publicly defamed you. She lied to the media. She falsely accused you of harassment, which could have ruined your life. If she's coming after you with a lawsuit, we come back even harder. Richard nodded slowly. If we file a counter lawsuit for defamation and racial discrimination, we put her on the defensive. Addison smirked. Harriet wanted a war? Let's give her one. Jordan hesitated. Would we actually have a case? Richard's eyes gleamed. Son, with that footage, we have a slam dunk case. The next morning, the headlines had shifted again. Jordan Harrington files lawsuit against Harriet Bloom for defamation and racial discrimination. New legal twist. Passenger fights back against false accusations. Harriet Bloom faces lawsuit after video exposes lies. Jordan scrolled through the articles, still trying to wrap his head around everything. Just days ago, he had been an ordinary guy trying to visit his sister. Now, he was at the center of a national legal battle. And Harriet? She was livid. Her lawyer had released a statement, calling Jordan's lawsuit frivolous and claiming Harriet was the true victim. Jordan scoffed. She still doesn't get it. The internet was eating it up. Harriet really thought she could get away with this, huh? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. She's about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong one. Addison grinned, scrolling. The internet is on your side now. Jordan exhaled. Let's hope the courts are, too. Days passed. Then a week. Then, Jordan's phone buzzed. It was Richard. Jordan answered immediately. What's up? Richard's voice was sharp. We just got word. Harriet's doubling down. She's not settling. Jordan's stomach tightened. So this is going to court? Richard sighed. Looks like it. Olivia cursed. She really won't let this go. Addison clenched her fists. She wants to destroy you, Jordan. Jordan exhaled. Then I guess we fight. Richard's voice softened. You sure about this, son? If we go to trial, things could get ugly. She will try to drag you through the mud. Jordan set his jaw. He had come too far to back down now. Let's do it, he said firmly. Richard nodded. All right, get ready, kid. Because this is about to get messy. Jordan sat in the quiet of Olivia's apartment, staring at the papers in front of him. A court date. It was official. Harriet Bloom had refused to settle. She was dragging him to trial. Across the room, Addison scrolled through her phone, shaking her head. This woman is obsessed. She could have just let it go, but no. She wants to win. Olivia folded her arms. This isn't about winning. This is about crushing him. Jordan exhaled, rubbing his temples. He knew Harriet wasn't just trying to clear her name. She wanted to punish him for daring to stand up to her. And now, the entire world would be watching. Richard's voice echoed in his mind. Get ready, kid, because this is about to get messy. The trial was set to begin in 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks were brutal. Jordan couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Some people stopped him on the street to shake his hand, calling him brave. Others sneered at him, accusing him of trying to ruin an innocent woman's life. The online war raged on. He's just looking for a payday. Harriet should have been banned from flying. This is why we need cameras everywhere. People lie too much. Jordan ignored most of it. He had bigger things to worry about, like the fact that Harriet's lawyers were digging into his past. Richard warned him that they were looking for anything they could use against him. Old tweets, college essays, even his high school disciplinary record. They're going to try to make you look like an unstable troublemaker, Richard said. They want to plant doubt in the jury's mind. Jordan clenched his jaw. I've never even been in trouble. Richard sighed. Doesn't matter. They'll twist anything. And sure enough, days before the trial, an article dropped. Who is Jordan Harrington? The man suing Harriet Bloom has a history of confrontation. Jordan's blood ran cold as he skimmed the piece. They had dug up an old college debate club video where he had passionately argued about systemic racism. The article twisted it to make him seem radical. Even worse, they found an incident from high school where he had gotten detention for refusing to remove his hoodie during class. They called it defiance against authority. Jordan wanted to scream. They were painting him as the angry black man. Addison slammed her phone down. They're really reaching. A debate club video? Are they serious? Olivia's eyes burned with fury. They're trying to turn public opinion against him before the trial even starts. Richard called a few minutes later. Jordan, listen to me, he said firmly. This is classic character assassination. Do not engage. Let me handle this. Jordan swallowed hard. What if they convince people? Richard's voice was calm but strong. Then we remind them of the truth. The day before the trial, Jordan barely slept. His mind raced with every possible outcome. Would the jury believe him? Would Harriet walk away free? Would he be the one ruined by all of this? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, it all came to a head. No more social media battles. No more headlines. Just the truth. And he prayed that would be enough. Jordan stepped into the courthouse, his heart pounding like a war drum. This was it. The moment Harriet Bloom had been waiting for. The moment he had been dreading. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back rows, their cameras flashing as he walked past. The internet had turned this trial into a spectacle, and now the world was watching. Harriet sat at the plaintiff's table, her expression carefully composed, soft, fragile. She wore a conservative gray suit, her makeup natural, her demeanor performative. She wanted to look like the victim. Jordan clenched his jaw. She was good at this. Too good. Across the room, her legal team sat stiffly in their expensive suits. They looked like sharks, ready to tear him apart. Jordan sat next to Richard, who placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You ready for this? Jordan exhaled. As I'll ever be. The judge entered. The room stood. The trial had begun. The opening arguments set the tone immediately. Harriet's lawyer, a smug-looking man named Victor Lawson, painted her as a terrified woman who had merely requested a seat change but had been attacked online by a vindictive social media mob. She has lost everything, Victor said dramatically. Her reputation, her privacy, her peace of mind. All because Mr. Harrington twisted a simple misunderstanding into a racially charged attack against her. Jordan nearly choked. He twisted it? She was the one who had lied. She was the one who had tried to remove him from his seat. Victor continued, pacing the courtroom. Mr. Harrington's actions led to my client receiving death threats. Hate mail. She has been vilified by millions of people who don't even know her. She is not a racist. She is a victim. Jordan's blood boiled. She was playing them. Then, Richard stood. Calm, cool, unshaken. He walked to the jury, his hands clasped behind his back. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about another victim. A man who paid for his seat, only to be told he didn't belong in it. A man who was threatened by a flight attendant simply for existing in a space that a wealthy woman decided was hers. Richard's voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. This trial is not about a social media attack. It's about accountability. And it's about the truth. He turned to the jury. And today, we will show you the truth. The first witness called was Harriet Bloom herself. She walked to the stand slowly, her posture slumped, as if she was barely holding herself together. She sniffled as she took her oath. Jordan nearly rolled his eyes. She was acting. Victor approached her gently. Miss Bloom, can you tell the jury how this ordeal has affected your life? Harriet nodded weakly. It's been a nightmare, she whispered. I've received so much hate. People calling me horrible names. Saying I should lose my job. I'm scared to leave my home. Her voice cracked at just the right moment. Jordan knew a performance when he saw one. Victor nodded sympathetically. And all because Mr. Harrington lied about you? Harriet took a shuddering breath.
Yes.
Jordan clenched his fists under the table. Then came the real twist. Victor sighed. Miss Bloom, I'm so sorry to ask you this, but have you ever received threats of physical violence because of this? Harriet nodded.
Yes.
The courtroom gasped. Victor turned to the jury, his face grave. Ladies and gentlemen, we have evidence that Mr. Harrington's supporters doxed my client. They leaked her address. They sent her threats of violence. Jordan's stomach dropped. That wasn't his fault. He had never told anyone to attack Harriet. He had only spoken the truth. But Victor wasn't done. He turned back to Harriet. And because of this, you now fear for your life, don't you? Harriet nodded, her voice barely above a whisper.
Yes.
The jury shifted uncomfortably. Jordan felt sick. Victor turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence a sample of the threats my client has received. A stack of printed emails and social media screenshots was handed to the bailiff. Jordan's heart pounded as the judge flipped through them, his expression unreadable. Then, objection. Richard stood, his voice firm. Your Honor, Mr. Harrington is not responsible for the actions of internet trolls. There is no proof that he encouraged any of these messages. Victor smirked. Perhaps not. But he created the storm that led to them. Jordan's blood ran cold. This was worse than he thought. They weren't trying to prove he lied. They were trying to blame him for what other people had done. The judge sighed. Objection overruled. The jury will review the evidence. Jordan swallowed hard. The damage was already done. Harriet dabbed her eyes with a tissue, looking every bit the traumatized woman. And the jury? They were buying it. Jordan's pulse thundered in his ears as Harriet stepped down from the witness stand. She had played her part perfectly. Her soft voice, her trembling hands, the calculated tears. And now, the jury felt for her. They believed her. Addison whispered under her breath. She's good. Too good. Jordan swallowed hard. If they didn't turn this around, Harriet would win. Richard leaned toward him. Stay calm. We still have our turn. Jordan nodded stiffly, but he wasn't sure he believed it. Victor, Harriet's lawyer, turned back to the judge. Your Honor, we rest our case. The judge nodded, then turned to Richard. Defense, you may proceed. Richard stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, I'd like to call our first witness, Jordan Harrington. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jordan's breath hitched. This was it, his moment to fight back. The courtroom was silent as Jordan took the stand. Richard approached him, his face calm but serious. Mr. Harrington, Richard began, let's start with the basics. Did you, at any point, encourage people to harass Miss Bloom? Jordan sat up straight. No.
Never.
Richard nodded. Did you ever publicly share her address or personal information? Jordan frowned. No. I don't even know her address. Richard turned to the jury. There is zero evidence linking my client to the threats Miss Bloom received. But let's talk about what is on record. He walked back to his table and picked up a document. Richard held up the transcript of Harriet's original airline complaint, the one she had filed before Jordan even went public. Mr. Harrington, Richard said, flipping to a key section. In Miss Bloom's own words, she stated that she felt uncomfortable sitting next to you. Jordan nodded.
Yes.
And she never claimed in this document that you harassed her, correct? Correct. Richard turned back to the jury. In fact, she only accused Mr. Harrington of harassment after the video of her behavior went viral. Before that, her only issue was comfort. Victor stood. Objection. Miss Bloom was traumatized. She didn't remember all the details at first. Richard smirked. Funny how she remembered after she became the villain online. The judge sighed. Objection overruled.
Proceed.
Richard walked closer to Jordan. Mr. Harrington, how did it feel to be told that you should move from the seat you paid for? Jordan exhaled. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I didn't belong. Richard nodded. Like you were less than her? Jordan's throat tightened.
Yes.
A beat of silence. Richard let the words hang in the air. Then, he walked over to the television screen in the courtroom. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to introduce new evidence. Victor stiffened. New evidence? We were not informed. Richard cut him off. This footage was obtained directly from the airline. It was only released after multiple requests. Jordan's stomach flipped. It was happening. The real evidence was about to be shown. The judge gestured for him to continue. Richard clicked play. And then, the truth played for everyone to see. The courtroom was dead silent as the footage rolled. There was Harriet, walking onto the plane, perfectly fine. There was Harriet, spotting Jordan and immediately whispering to Carter. There was Carter nodding before even speaking to Jordan. Jordan clenched his fists as Harriet's lawyer shifted in his seat. And then, Harriet's final words to Carter played. "Get rid of him." The words echoed through the courtroom. Someone gasped. Victor shot up from his seat. "Objection. This is completely out of context." Richard didn't flinch. "The footage speaks for itself, Your Honor." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Objection overruled." Harriet paled. Her confidence was cracking. Richard turned to Jordan. "Did you, at any point, threaten Miss Bloom?" Jordan's voice was steady now. "No, I never even raised my voice." Richard nodded, then turned back to the jury. "And yet, she wanted him removed. Not because he was a danger, not because he did anything wrong, but because she simply wanted him gone." Harriet clenched her jaw, her hands gripping the table. Richard turned to the jury, his voice cool and sharp. "This case is not about defamation. It's about a wealthy, privileged woman using her power to remove someone she didn't want near her. And when the truth came out, she tried to silence him." The jury's eyes were locked on Harriet. She knew she was losing. Richard walked back to the table, calm as ever. "No further questions, Your Honor." The trial recessed for the day, but the damage had been done. The internet exploded. Harriet Bloom caught lying in court. New footage proves Harriet Bloom targeted Jordan Harrington. This woman is done. Harriet's legal team scrambled to do damage control. But Jordan? For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt hope. The tides had finally turned. But he knew Harriet Bloom wouldn't go down quietly. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Harriet Bloom was cornered. The footage had shattered her carefully constructed lies. The jury had seen her whisper to Carter. They had heard her say, "Get rid of him." And the internet? It had turned against her completely. Memes flooded social media. Get rid of him? More like get rid of you. Harriet Bloom, America's least favorite airline passenger, hopes she enjoys her new career as a full-time liar. It was bad. But Harriet? She wasn't the type to accept defeat. She had to strike back. And when court resumed the next morning, she did. Harriet sat stiffly in the witness chair, her hands neatly folded in her lap. Her lawyer, Victor, approached with forced confidence. "Miss Bloom," he began, "the footage we saw yesterday, it's troubling to say the least. But I want to ask you something very important." Harriet took a slow, steady breath. "Of course." Victor clasped his hands. "When you whispered to the flight attendant, were you ordering him to remove Mr. Harrington? Or were you expressing fear?" Jordan nearly laughed. Fear? Was that seriously their play? Harriet's lips trembled. She turned toward the jury with careful, watery eyes. "I was afraid," she whispered. The jury stirred. Victor nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Afraid of what?" Harriet exhaled, playing the victim again. "Afraid of conflict." Jordan stiffened. Harriet continued. "I saw Mr. Harrington and I panicked. I had a bad experience with a man who looked like him once. It was years ago, but it triggered something in me. I wasn't thinking rationally. I just wanted to be safe. Safe. Safe." Jordan's blood boiled. Victor sighed dramatically. "So you weren't acting out of malice?" Harriet shook her head. "No, I was acting out of fear." A calculated silence fell over the courtroom. Jordan could feel the jury shifting in their seats. Doubt. They had seen the footage, but Harriet was playing a dangerous game. One that had worked for people like her before. She wasn't outright denying what happened. She was making herself the victim. She was humanizing herself. Jordan's hands clenched into fists. Victor turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Richard stood immediately. It was time to end this. Richard approached Harriet slowly, flipping through his notes. Then he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Bloom," he said coolly, "you claim you were afraid. But let's go back to the beginning. Harriet blinked. Okay. Richard gestured toward the footage still paused on the screen. This was taken before Mr. Harrington ever spoke to you, before you had any interaction, correct? Harriet hesitated.
Yes.
Richard's voice sharpened. And yet, you immediately asked Carter to get rid of him. Harriet wet her lips. I was reacting to... Richard cut her off. Reacting to what, Miss Bloom? Mr. Harrington hadn't spoken to you, hadn't even looked at you. What exactly triggered your fear? Harriet faltered. I just had a bad feeling. Richard took a slow step forward. So what about Mr. Harrington gave you this bad feeling? Harriet swallowed. I don't know.
It was instinct.
Richard didn't blink. Instinct. Harriet nodded quickly.
Yes.
Richard let the word hang in the air. Then he asked the question that would decide everything. Tell me, Miss Bloom, if Mr. Harrington had looked different, if he had been white, would you have still felt the same instinct? The courtroom went silent. Harriet's face paled. Her mouth opened, then closed. She knew she couldn't answer that. If she said yes, she would sound irrational. If she said no, she would expose her own bias. She was trapped. Richard tilted his head. Miss Bloom? Harriet's hands trembled on the witness stand. Then, she did something no one expected. She snapped. Harriet's eyes flashed with anger. You're twisting my words. I'm not a racist. Richard didn't flinch. I never said you were. Harriet's face turned red. I was scared. And now I'm being treated like some monster. Do you people have any idea what this has been like for me? You people. Jordan saw Richard's lips twitch. She had done it. She had revealed herself. Richard stepped back. No further questions, Your Honor. Harriet was still fuming as the judge banged his gavel. Court will recess for an hour. The jury had seen enough. Harriet Bloom had lost. But Jordan wasn't celebrating just yet, because Harriet still had one last move to play, and it was going to be ugly. Harriet Bloom had lost control. Her carefully crafted image, the soft-spoken, fragile woman wronged by Jordan, had cracked in front of the entire courtroom. Do you people have any idea what this has been like for me? The second those words left her lips, the jury's demeanor shifted. Some stiffened. Others glanced at each other, their expressions unreadable. Harriet knew she had messed up. And now, as court resumed after recess, Jordan braced himself. Harriet had one move left, and she was about to play it. Harriet's lawyer, Victor, stood, his face tight with frustration. He had lost the jury's sympathy. Harriet's outburst had cost them. So now, he was trying a different angle. He walked up to Harriet, who was back on the stand, her posture rigid. Miss Bloom, Victor said carefully, in your opinion, what has been the real consequence of this entire situation? Harriet's lips trembled. She turned to the jury, eyes glassy with unshed tears. The real consequence, she whispered. I've lost everything. Jordan clenched his jaw. Here we go. Harriet continued, her voice quivering. Before this happened, I had a good life. I had a successful career, friends who respected me, a family who was proud of me. She sniffled dramatically. But after Jordan Harrington lied about me, after he turned the internet against me, my life was destroyed. She placed a delicate hand on her chest. I was fired from my job. Jordan's stomach twisted. That part was true. Harriet had been publicly dropped from her corporate position after the footage leaked, and she was about to use that to her advantage. I can't go anywhere without being recognized, Harriet continued. People spit at me, call me a monster. My family, they won't even speak to me anymore. She choked back a sob. Jordan's hands clenched into fists under the table. She was trying to shift the blame. Harriet's downfall wasn't because of him. It was because she had been caught. Victor nodded, his expression sympathetic. Miss Bloom, do you regret what happened? Harriet inhaled shakily.
Yes.
Jordan narrowed his eyes. Harriet glanced at the jury, voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to hurt anyone. I never meant for things to go this far. If I could go back, if I could change what happened. Her voice broke. Jordan saw it. The calculation behind her eyes. She wasn't apologizing. She was pushing guilt onto him. Victor sighed. Thank you, Miss Bloom. No further questions. Jordan's stomach churned. The jury had already seen the footage. They had already witnessed Harriet's real face. But that didn't mean she couldn't still sway them. Richard exhaled beside him. She's desperate, he muttered. That means we're close to the end. Then, he stood. Richard approached Harriet with measured steps, his face unreadable. Miss Bloom, he said smoothly, just to clarify, are you saying you regret your actions? Harriet nodded quickly. Yes. I never meant for this to happen. Richard raised an eyebrow. You never meant for this to happen? Harriet hesitated. No. Richard turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, let's review what actually happened. He gestured to the screen, where the footage was paused at the moment Harriet smirked at Carter before saying, "Get rid of him." The courtroom was silent. Richard turned back to Harriet. This was before Mr. Harrington ever spoke to you, before you knew anything about him. And yet, you ordered the flight attendant to remove him. Harriet's jaw tightened. Richard tilted his head. So tell me, Miss Bloom, when you say you regret what happened, do you regret what you did? Or do you regret getting caught? Harriet's breath hitched. She knew she had no way out. If she admitted to lying, she lost. If she denied it, the footage exposed her. The jury was watching her closely, waiting. Harriet's nails dug into the armrest. Her lips pressed together. Then, she made the fatal mistake. She stayed silent. The damage was done. Richard exhaled. No further questions, Your Honor. Harriet's head lowered. She had lost. The closing arguments were short. Victor tried one last time to paint Harriet as the true victim. He spoke about cancel culture, about how Harriet had been punished enough. Richard countered with the truth. This wasn't about cancel culture. This was about consequences. Then, the jury left to deliberate. Jordan's heart pounded in his chest. It all came down to this. Hours passed. The wait was excruciating. Jordan sat with Olivia and Addison in the courthouse lounge, barely speaking. Then, the call came. The jury has reached a verdict. Jordan's stomach twisted as he stood. This is it, Olivia whispered. Jordan swallowed hard. And then, he walked back inside. The courtroom was tense as the jury foreman stood. The judge nodded. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Jordan clenched his fists. The foreman took a deep breath. In the matter of Harriet Bloom versus Jordan Harrington, regarding the charge of defamation, we find in favor of the defendant. Jordan's breath rushed out of him. He had won. Harriet lost. She had no case. But then, the foreman continued. In the matter of Jordan Harrington versus Harriet Bloom, regarding the charge of defamation and racial discrimination, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The courtroom exploded. Harriet's face crumbled. Her hands trembled. Her lawyer paled. Jordan barely processed it as the judge banged his gavel. Miss Bloom, the judge said firmly, this court finds that your actions were racially motivated and that your accusations were false and defamatory. You are hereby ordered to pay damages to Mr. Harrington for the harm caused to his reputation and mental distress. Harriet gasped. And no, her lawyer whispered urgently to her, but it was over. Harriet had lost everything. Jordan had won everything. It was over. Jordan exhaled shakily. He had survived. But even as the reporters rushed to cover the biggest legal case of the year, he knew this wasn't just his victory. It was a victory for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Harriet Bloom tried to erase him, but in the end, he erased her instead. The world erupted. The moment the verdict was announced, social media exploded. News channels ran the headline on a constant loop. Harriet Bloom found guilty of defamation and racial discrimination. Justice served. Jordan Harrington wins landmark case against airline passenger who tried to remove him. A defining moment in holding the privileged accountable. Harriet had been defeated, and now she had to face the consequences. Jordan stepped out of the courthouse, and the crowd was waiting. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. People cheered, chanting his name. He was no longer just a man who stood his ground. He was a symbol. Olivia gripped his arm. You did it, she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Addison smirked. I knew you'd win. Harriet never stood a chance. Jordan exhaled. It still didn't feel real. All he had done was refuse to give up his seat. And yet, that simple act had ignited a national movement. Richard patted his shoulder. Let's get out of here before they drag you into another press conference. But before Jordan could take a step, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Jordan. He turned and saw her. Harriet Bloom. Her once pristine suit was wrinkled. Her face was red, her eyes swollen. The woman who had walked into court so confident now looked like she had lost everything. And in many ways, she had. Her job, her reputation, her power. Jordan stiffened as she stormed toward him. Security stepped closer, but Harriet wasn't attacking. She was pleading. Her voice cracked. I just want to talk. Jordan didn't move. He didn't know her anything. Harriet swallowed hard. I never meant for it to go this far. Jordan exhaled, his jaw tightening. But you did. Harriet flinched. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just done. She searched his face. I lost everything. Jordan tilted his head. You did that to yourself. Harriet's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to say something, but she had nothing left. And as the cameras clicked around them, Harriet Bloom, a woman who had once been untouchable, was officially irrelevant. She was finished. And Jordan? He walked away. Weeks passed. Jordan's life had changed forever. He had become a household name. Talk shows wanted to interview him. Civil rights groups reached out, wanting him to speak on racial bias in travel. His case had set a legal precedent. Airlines worldwide were forced to reevaluate their policies. People who had suffered in silence before were now speaking up. Jordan had one more than just a case. He had changed everything. And yet, all he really wanted was peace. One afternoon, he sat on Olivia's balcony, looking out at the Seattle skyline. For the first time in months, he felt free. No cameras. No courtrooms. No Harriet Bloom. Just him. Addison plopped down next to him, sipping a soda. So, what's next? Jordan chuckled. You tell me. She smirked. You're famous now. You could write a book. Start a foundation. Run for office. Jordan rolled his eyes. I just want to breathe. Olivia walked over, handing him a plane ticket. Jordan blinked. What's this? Olivia smiled. Your first-class ticket back home. Courtesy of the airline. Jordan laughed. Irony at its finest. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to fly again. Addison nudged him. You can't avoid planes forever, Jordan. He exhaled. I know. And maybe, just maybe, he would take that flight. But this time, no one would ever tell him he didn't belong. Because he did. And he always had. The fight was over. Justice had been served. And now, Jordan Harrington could finally live. The end.